Hey everyone, this is Will at Third and Long. We have some off-season college football news. So obviously there's been a lot of movement in the off-season so far, going from 2023 to 2024. We've had coaches leaving, coaches coming, coaches retiring, coordinators moving, a lot of players going in and out of the transfer portal. So there's definitely been a lot of movement in the offseason so far. But what just recently happened this past week was Fanduel and 247 did come out with their win predictions for the SEC conference. And that's what we're actually going to be looking at today. We are going to be seeing team by team what Fanduel predicts every single team's final record will be win and loss wise based off of who's on the roster as of right now. So let's go ahead and get started just kind of going team by team through the SEC conference. Kicking things off at the top of that list, they have the Missouri Tigers. They have them winning 9.5 games. So they have them having a pretty good follow-up season to their year they had last year. They did finish last year in the top 10. They had 11 wins. Drinkwitz completely fit this team. They had a top 30 offense last year. They had a top 30 defense. They did lose a lot of defensive players to the draft. But Brady Cook, their quarterback, he had 29 touchdowns last year, 3,400 yards. He is coming back for his last year of eligibility. So this team is going to be able to go to vertical. They had a really strong one game last year. They're going to be moving the ball. Now, the SEC, obviously, they have some new teams coming in. They have Texas coming in. They have Oklahoma coming in. But Missouri actually has one of the easier schedules in the SEC this year. It's still a tough schedule. It is still the SEC, but it's not as difficult as, let's say, Florida's or Alabama's schedule. But they do have a back-loaded portion in conference-wise in the schedule. So they finished the season Oklahoma, South Carolina, Mississippi State, Arkansas. So they have a lot of in-conference teams at the end of the year, but everything's actually setting up for them to kind of cruise into a 9 to 10 win season. And with the playoff changes this year, winning 10 games could actually get you in the 12-team playoff now. So they have something to look forward to. Had there been a 12-team playoff last year, they would have made it, but they have that shot this year with a more experienced coach and a more experienced team. I definitely think that Fanduel picking them to win 9.5 was right on. They should be right there in 9 to 10 wins or so. The next team that we're going to be looking at is the Vanderbilt Commodores, and Fanduel has them winning 2.5 games. Now, I don't want to sound mean here, but that's probably pretty accurate. So this is not a good football team at all. They had a couple competitive games last year, but this is a really bad team. They definitely did not make a bowl game last year. Vanderbilt very rarely makes a bowl game. When they do, it's a pretty big deal, but they have them winning 2 to 3 games. They were really bad in the SEC before, and the SEC conference is even more loaded with the Longhorns and Sooners coming in. Their schedule, you have Georgia State, Missouri, Bama, Kentucky, Ball State, Texas, Auburn, South Carolina, LSU, Tennessee. They'd be very lucky to win 3 games. I think this prediction's spot on, 2 to 3 games. If they win 2 games, I would not be surprised in any way whatsoever. It's not really their fault. They're an academic school. They really don't belong in the SEC at all. They have a good baseball program, basketball, no, football, no. The fact that they get money from the SEC conference for football is very good for them, but they don't really bring anything to the conference at all, sports-wise, especially football. So this is a 3-win max. I would be really surprised if this team win 3 games. I think they're more in the 2 wins. The next team that we're looking at is the Kentucky Wildcats. Fanduel has them predicted at 6.5 wins. Kentucky, I say it every year. I definitely said it this past season. They always run out to 4-0, 5-0. They get ranked. Everyone thinks that they're a great program, and then they just completely fall apart, lose 5 games straight, finish the year 6-6, 7-5. It happens like that every single season. This is never a good football team. They always have a really good physical defense, a good run game. Their issue is always the quarterback position. Even with Will Levis, they couldn't throw the ball past 10 yards. They're just never a good offensive team. It is what it is. Conference got tougher. They're not going to get better. They're competitive, though. They always play tough. They play physical, and they always have a top 25 defense. But this schedule, I don't think it's going to let them get out to that usual 4-0, 5-0 this season. So when you're looking at basically who they're going to be playing, they have a lot of tough teams. So they have Southern Miss, South Carolina, Georgia, Ohio, Ole Miss. So they could start out, 3-2, and then they have Vanderbilt, Florida, Auburn, Tennessee, Murray State, Texas, Louisville. So they have to beat everyone that they're predicted to beat to make a bowl game this season. I could see them going 6-6. I don't see this being a 7-win team personally. They have them predicted at 6.5, but I could see them finishing the year 6-6, which wouldn't be bad with their schedule. The next team that we're looking at is the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Fanduel has them coming in at 4.5 wins. Obviously, they have a new first-year coach. They have Jeff Lebby, who was the offensive coordinator for the Oklahoma Sooners. He's now the head coach at Mississippi State. He was previously the offensive coordinator there before, so he's familiar. Well, he was at Ole Miss, so he's familiar with the state of Mississippi. He's an offensive guy. Their offense last year was pathetic, atrocious. They're obviously having a complete reboot there. He's going to be bringing an offensively focused team back in line there. They have a lot of transfers, but this team completely flipping. They were left bare bones last year. It's not his fault. He's going to have to rebuild the roster and rebuild the team at the skill positions. He's not going to come in and get a bowl game his first year, to me, as of right now. So that 4.5 wins, that definitely makes sense. They don't have an easy schedule, but they have to win versus these not very good team that they're playing starting out. So they have to beat Eastern Kentucky, they have to beat Arizona State, they have to beat Toledo, who's always going to be difficult. Florida's a team that they could beat, but Florida could also beat them. And then boom, things get difficult. Texas, Georgia, Texas A&M, Arkansas, UMass, they should win that. Tennessee, Missouri, Ole Miss. So there's some tough teams there. I have them winning. I could see 4 to 5 games. I definitely think that makes sense. I think 4 games probably makes sense as of right now. The next team that we're looking at is one of the new teams to the SEC. We have the Oklahoma Sooners. Fanduel has them coming in at 7.5 wins. This is probably really going to piss Sooner fans off. This is obviously a very storied team. This team always wins 10 games. Really good team, really good roster. 7.5 wins. Fans are not going to be happy with that. It's a new conference. Dylan Gabriel, who was your Heisman-level quarterback, did transfer out. He went to the Oregon Ducks. So you're bringing in Jackson Arnold is the quarterback. He was a 5-star quarterback, so obviously he has a lot of praise. He's played well, but he's a first-year starter in the team's first year in the SEC. It's going to be a lot more difficult regular season than they're used to coming from the Big 12. This is a good team. This is a good roster, but they've had some changes at the most important positions, and they never solved their run game from last year. Their biggest weakness last year was they didn't have a number 1 running back. That's carried over into this year so far, and they're breaking in a new quarterback. They're going to get more and more wins every season, but it's a tough first year. So they have Temple, that's a win, Houston win, Tulane win. Then things get tough. Tennessee, Auburn, Texas, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Maine, Missouri, Alabama, LSU. A lot of tough teams, a lot of top 15 caliber teams. I think a 7-win season is definitely in the cards as of right now for the Sooners. Sooner fans, don't be worried. First year with a first-year quarterback, you should get more and more wins every single season going forward. The next team that we're looking at is Sam Pittman's Arkansas Razorbacks, 5.5 wins. Sam Pittman probably should have been fired at this point as of right now. Obviously, they lost KJ Jefferson. This team's completely going nowhere as of right now. They've made awful coordinator hires recently. Their schedule, they have 7 ranked teams. They have a gauntlet that they're going through. They have to play UAPB, which that's obviously going to be a win. Then they have out-of-conference Oklahoma State. They have UAB, Auburn, A&M, Tennessee, LSU, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Texas, Louisiana Tech, which is you can't overlook them, Missouri. This is a really tough schedule. I have them getting like 4 to 5 wins. I'm going to go with the under here. I don't have them winning 5.5. I don't think they're going to get near 6. They're not going to get a bowl game. I have them winning 4 to 5 games. The next team that we're looking at is the Florida Gators. Fanduel has them predicted at 5.5 wins. I honestly think the Florida Gators have the toughest schedule back-to-back seasons again. They did not make a bowl game last year. Billy Napier is going to be on fire this season. His seat's going to be so hot. I didn't like the hire to begin with, and it's definitely not looking good right now, and their schedule's not helping. But just their November schedule so difficult. So kicking things off, they have Miami, Samford, A&M, Mississippi State, UCF, Tennessee, Kentucky, Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, Florida State. Gosh, they play, 6, 7 ranked teams. This is going to be a tough season. If they 5.5, I think, is giving them way too much credit. They have a lot of issues, and their defense was god-awful last year. Will they be better this year? Potentially, but they can't possibly get worse. This is a 4 to 5 win team, so I'm going to go under on that win total also. The next team we're looking at is the South Carolina Gamecocks, another 5.5 win team. I'm going to go, this could potentially be a 6-6 team. They could possibly make a bowl game, but I think Shane Beamer's team is going to get 5 wins. They also have a tough schedule. The conference is just so stacked now. They have Old Dominion, Kentucky, LSU, Akron, Ole Miss, Alabama, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, Vanderbilt, Missouri, Wofford, Clemson. So they're playing, 4 to 5 ranked teams, and then they also, they might get an upset in there, but they're also going to lose some of those games. And just the fact that one of their out-of-conference games is Clemson just makes the schedule even more difficult. I have them getting 5 wins. The next team that we're looking at is the Ole Miss Rebels. Lane Kiffin's team, they have them predicted to get 9.5 wins. This is a team like Missouri. They would have made the playoffs last year. They finished last year in the top 10. They finished with 10 or 11 wins. They would have made the playoffs last year, but now that we have the expanded playoffs, they're definitely in the running to make the playoffs this year. They won the transfer portal so far this year. Lane Kiffin has built a monster team. They added wideouts. They added defensive players. They lost Quinton Junkins. It's fine. This team's stacked. Lane Kiffin will be able to score points, and their defense will be better. Looking at their schedule, they're coming in here. They have Furman, Middle Tennessee, Wake Forest, Georgia Southern. So they're starting out the year 4-0. And then they have Kentucky, South Carolina, LSU, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Georgia, and Florida. And then they have Mississippi State. So not a difficult schedule, not an easy schedule, but one of the easier schedules in the conference. I think this is a 10-2 team. I feel pretty confident saying that. So I'm going to go with them getting 10. The next team that we're going to look at is the Auburn Tigers. Fanduel has them winning 7.5 games. I think that's a fair assessment. Hugh Freeze obviously had to start flipping this roster last year. Their biggest issue was quarterback, and offense was pathetic last year. They should be a lot better this year. They had a pretty tough defense last year. So hopefully they'll be bringing that into this year also. But their schedule's not bad, and their out-of-conference schedule is a cakewalk. So they should be blessed because they're in a tough conference, and they avoid everybody, basically. So they start out with Alabama, A&M, California, New Mexico, Arkansas. So they can start the year 4-0 there. And then they have Oklahoma, Georgia, Missouri, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, ULM, Texas A&M, and Alabama. So they have a very easy 5 to 6 wins, and then every other game is competitive from that point. So I could easily see this team winning 7 to 8 games and taking another step forward. The next team that we're looking at is the LSU Tigers. Fanduel has them winning 9.5 games, and not because they're a really good team, but because they don't have a difficult schedule, really, for the SEC conference. Brian Kelly made some defensive changes. Their defense last year was basically Swiss cheese. They were giving up points left and right. They had Jaden Daniels win the Heisman. That's basically what carried them through the season. Outside of him, they'd have won 3-4 games last season. He is off to the NFL now, so they have to retool their really good offense, and they have to completely rebuild a garbage defense. So basically, how's that going to stack out? Looking at their schedule, they're going to start out the year with USC, so a really good out-of-conference game. Then they have Nicholls, South Carolina, UCLA, South Alabama, Ole Miss, Arkansas, A&M, Alabama, Florida, Vanderbilt, Oklahoma. I don't think this is a good team. This is not a bad team. They won what I predicted them to win last year, so I wasn't surprised there. It's just they were carried by Jaden Daniels. He's gone. That's a massive loss. They have to replace him, and their defense has to get better. I think it's an 8 to 9 win team. I do not have them winning 10 games. The next team is the Texas A&M Aggies. Fanduel predicts them to get 8.5 wins. Obviously, Jimbo Fisher's gone. They brought in Elko. He will bring a defensive mind to the team, but they do have to retool their offense. This is a very talented team. Jimbo Fisher recruited well, but obviously a lot of guys transferred out, but they still have a lot of holes to fill. So they have them winning 8 to 9 games. Their schedule, they have Notre Dame's a really tough game to kick things off. Then they have McNeese, Florida, Bowling Green, Arkansas, Missouri, Mississippi State, LSU, South Carolina, New Mexico State, Auburn, and Texas. So there's some easy games there. There's some pretty difficult games there. I don't have them getting 9 wins. I could see them going 8-4, and I think that would be a pretty good season so far for Mike Elko. The next team, another first team to the SEC, the Texas Longhorns. Fanduel has them at 10.5 wins. They have them hovering around 11 wins first year in the SEC. their schedule got more difficult. They went from the Big 12 to the SEC, and they have them basically taking control of the SEC and making the playoffs. They're hovering around 10 to 11 wins, which will definitely get them in the playoffs. Obviously, they lost Worthy. Quinn Ewers are staying. This team is loaded on defense, a top 20 defense, a top 20 offense. They have a great O-line. They have a great rush defense. They have wideouts. They have tight ends. They have running backs. They have Manning at the backup position. This team is a loaded roster. Steve Sarkisian better make the playoffs this year. There's no excuse to not make the playoffs back-to-back seasons. Looking at their schedule, they have Colorado State. Then they have Michigan, so a tough out-of-conference game, and then UTSA, ULM, Mississippi State, Oklahoma, Georgia, Vanderbilt, Florida, Arkansas, Kentucky, A&M. So they do avoid some of the better teams in the conference. The schedule is set up, to me, for them to cruise to a 10-2 season. So I think that FanDuel's spot on. They should win 10 to 11 games during the regular season, and that should get them in the playoffs easy. The next team we're taking a look at is the Tennessee Volunteers. They've completely had a reboot under Josh Heupel. The guy knows how to call plays, knows how to run an offense, but he's built this team up, and their defense has been getting better every single season. Fans are finally getting what they want. They're going to have the 5-star number 1 player, Nico, starting at quarterback next season. So what can Josh Heupel with that air raid do with him? They have them getting 8.5 wins, which is actually a really good season for a first-year starter coming in there in a really tough conference. Looking at their schedule, they're going to have Chattanooga, NC State's a pretty tough out-of-conference game there. Kent State, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Florida, Alabama, Kentucky, Mississippi State, Georgia, Vanderbilt. So not an easy schedule by any means, but not a difficult schedule. There's definitely tougher schedules in their own conference. 9-3 would be a really good season. I think it's more realistic for them to go 8-4. So FanDuel spot on there between 8 to 9 wins. 9 wins to me would be their ceiling. 8-4 is a acceptable floor for them with a first-year starting quarterback. The next team who has a really tough schedule, the Georgia Bulldogs. So obviously, they're the team of the last 3 to 4 years in college football. They have them getting 10.5 wins, but they have a really tough schedule. So they kick things off first Clemson. So right out the gate, really tough out-of-conference ranked matchup. Then they have Tennessee Tech, Kentucky, Alabama, Auburn, Mississippi State, Texas, Florida, Ole Miss, Tennessee, UMass, Georgia Tech. They have some garbage teams they're playing, and they have a lot of really good to decent teams that they're playing. Not an easy schedule at all. It's very conceivable for them to go 10-2. 10-2 with that schedule would not be bad, and it's still going to get them in the playoffs. So all that they have to do, if they can lose 2 games, they're still going to get in. They're probably not going to run the table with that schedule. That'd be incredible. They play Alabama, they play Texas, they play Clemson, they play Ole Miss. So a tough gauntlet. 10-2 is a really strong season for them. And the final team, we're going to look at the Alabama Crimson Tide. FanDuel predicts them to get 9.5 wins. The biggest thing is obviously Nick Saban retired. Kalen DeBoer comes in. They've had a lot of players transfer into the portal, but they're still bringing back a lot of their offensive players, including their star quarterback. So the defense will still be strong. The offense will still be great. They have an offensively focused team, but they've had a complete turnover from the top to the bottom. New coach, new offensive and defensive coordinators, and changes at some of the skilled positions. So there's some pretty big losses there. Plus Nick Saban's gone, so they're definitely going to take a step back. But Kalen DeBoer is still a really good coach. He just has to reform this team into what he wants going forward for his style of play. Looking at their schedule, they have Western Kentucky, USF, Wisconsin, a pretty decent out-of-conference game there. Then Georgia, Vanderbilt, South Carolina, Tennessee, Missouri, LSU, Mercer, Oklahoma, Auburn. So they avoid Texas. They avoid Ole Miss. That's pretty good for your conference schedule so far. They don't play a lot of the best teams, but yes, they still have to play Georgia, and they still have to play at Missouri and LSU. So some tough games, but they don't have to play a lot of the tough teams. So I think this is a 9-3 season, which is probably going to upset some Bama fans because they've been pretty spoiled since 2006 to 2007-ish. but that's still a really strong season for a new coach rebuilding the team into his style of program going forward. 9-3, that's what I predict for them in the 2024 college football season. So that's just a review of the FanDuel and 247 predictions for every team in the SEC.